You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday 18th of August 2014. Church of England attacks government response to Iraq crisis. Travelodge removes Bibles from rooms. Hodge Hill Birmingham Tesco store trashed by Gaza protesters. Netherlands demonstrations banned in The Hague, the Schilderswijk district. Dutch mayor bans pro-Israel anti-ISIS rally as too provocative. Sweden racist posters blocked from buses. The Reverend West and the comment on Islam by Dr. Rowan Williams. Nigeria, Boko Haram terrorists slaughter 1,000 Christians by shooting them, cooking them alive and chopping them up in pieces. Guide dogs and guns, America's blind gunman. Save us from Iraq, Syria Caliphate, Eastern Christians. Thought for the day, democracy versus dictatorships. And finally, clean guys jokes. UK News. Church of England attacks government response to Iraq crisis. The Church of England has accused the government of appearing to have no coherent or comprehensive approach to tackling the rise of Islamic extremism. In a strongly worded attack on David Cameron's handling of the crisis in Iraq, backed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Bishop of Leeds said many senior clergy were seriously concerned. The Right Reverend Nicholas Baines has written to the Prime Minister questioning whether there is any long-term strategy and criticising a growing silence over the fate of the plight of persecuted Christians. World at 8. It's more than our life is worth to actually move in to save anything other than non-Christians or oil. Travelodge removes Bibles from rooms. The decision by one of Britain's largest hotel chains to remove Bibles from its rooms has sparked complaints from Christians. Travelodge, which operates 500 hotels, says the Bibles are removed for diversity reasons, citing the country's increasingly multicultural influences, the Daily Mail reported. The chain reportedly said that despite the recent uproar, the decision to remove the Bibles was made in 2007. The company has said in a statement that the move was designed so as not to discriminate against any religion. Now the Bibles, supplied by the Gideon Society, are available at the reception desks for guests to borrow. World at 8. Travelodge are only concerned with bums on beds, so why this? It is the only part of Travelodges that was traditional, the Bible in the drawer. Like electricity, not many people read it, it was just there. I don't think many Muslims stay in Travelodges, do they? Hodge Hill Birmingham Tesco store trashed by Gaza protesters. Police officers were attacked and stock was thrown around during a protest against the Gaza conflict at a Tesco store on Saturday. Demonstrators who want the supermarket to stop selling Israeli food entered Tesco in Hodge Hill, Birmingham, threw produce on the floor and shouted at staff and shoppers. Pictures show a large number of police officers at the scene and stock strewn across the floor of the store. West Midlands Police said one person was arrested for assaulting its officers during the protest. Speaking on social media, a customer said, "I was just in the Tesco in Hodge Hill scanning my items and I heard chanting. Then a group of Asian men holding Palestinian flags came walking in and started to push products over and getting aggressive with staff and shoppers. Officers tried to stop them, but I ran out." About 100 people had gathered outside the store to demonstrate, calling on Tesco to stop all trade with Israeli agricultural companies. A spokesman for West Midlands Police said, "Our officers dealt with the protest at Tesco Hodge Hill this morning, where some disorder was reported, one arrested for assaulting police. This protest was largely peaceful among the 100 protesters, but some began throwing stock inside the Tesco store." World at 8. If nationalists protested like this, our feet wouldn't touch the ground and the publicity would be an awful bunch of lies, but this lot, they can and do get away with murder. European news. Netherlands. Demonstrations banned in The Hague, Schilderswijk district. The Hague mayor Josias van Aartsen is to ban marches through the city's Schilderswijk district for the time being and is supported in his decision by the Public Prosecution Office, Dutch media report. He was speaking at an emergency meeting of the City Council on Thursday evening, calling after riots in the district last weekend. "I am more sorry than I can say that I have to take this decision," said Van Aertsen, who broke off his holiday to attend the meeting. Last week's riot broke out when around 150 Muslim youngsters began an illegal protest, blocking the route of a legal march against Muslim radicals and the Islamic State ISIS. The fact that Van Aertsen was on holiday and there was no statement on the incident from the City Council caused an outcry. The mayor was already under fire for not taking tough action during an anti-Jewish rally on July 24th, when demonstrators were heard chanting "Death to Jews" and protesters carried pro-ISIS flags. World at 8. This makes me sick. The fact this country has chosen a side, and that side is with the Muslims. On the flip side, Dutch mayor bans pro-Israel anti-ISIS rally as too provocative. While Islamic State IS jihadists battle their way across Syria and Iraq, beheading soldiers and civilians, training children for jihad, their supporters across Europe demand death to Jews and call for the blood of infidels. Now it seems some European leaders are refusing to fight back. The situation has become especially controversial in the Dutch political capital of The Hague, where pro-IS protesters in July involved anti-Jewish chants and a violent attack on a female journalist covering the event. As the Jew hate worsened and violence intensified, witnesses and Jewish advocacy groups called on the mayor's office to step in. But Mayor Josias Van Aertsen was on holiday and his deputy, left in charge, found no reason to intervene. Residents of The Hague, however, felt otherwise. On August 10th, the group calling itself Pro Patria staged its own freedom march through the same largely Muslim neighbourhood, the Schilderswijk, where the pro-IS demonstrations had been held. The aim, according to one organiser, was to show that this so-called Sharia triangle is still Dutch land, where Dutch laws and Dutch rules apply. The Schilderswijk has been referred to as the Sharia triangle frequently in the Dutch press. It was perhaps a naively optimistic notion. No sooner had the demonstrations started than pro-ISIS residents began attacking, throwing stones and starting fistfights. 6 people were arrested. World at 8. It brings me to mind of the celebrations of Armistice Day, World War I and World War II. All the dignitaries are standing around with faces like Wallace and Gromit, and most EU countries without exception handed over their Jews willingly to the Germans. They're doing the same now. Sweden racist posters blocked from buses. The public transport service in Skåne will not allow election campaign posters from the Sweden Democrats on their buses. Shortly after the Sweden Democrats presented their election campaign posters, Skånetrafiken is pulling the brakes on 3 of them. The reason is the transport service does not allow advertisements that could be interpreted as offensive, discriminating or racist, the company told newspaper Dagens ETC. Stockholm counterpart SL, however, has no problem with the party's campaign posters. SL told newspaper Expressen that they do not think the advertisements are crossing any lines. The Sweden Democrats are not happy with the move and accuses Skånetrafiken of acting like a political player. World at 8. They do the same throughout the EU. Nationalism and patriotism are dirty words now because they are not backed by the majority or the corporations. And now I hand you over to the Reverend West, who today talks about the statement from Dr. Rowan Williams that Islam is a great contributing factor to the unification of this country.
Rowan Williams and the belief that Mohammedanism is a renewing and a reinvigorating factor for British values. At the Living Islam Festival recently held in Lincolnshire, the bygone Lord Archbishop of Canterbury, the Right Reverend Dr. Rowan Williams, suggested that Mohammedanism is renewing and reinvigorating British values. I wonder how so intelligent and educated a man can be so misguided. We must be fair to Islam, certainly. However, the fact is that Islam is very different to the kind of beliefs and values upon which modern Europe is built. Europe is really a combination of Judeo-Christian beliefs on the one hand and the classical knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome on the other. Modern Europe is, in short, a mixing of Jerusalem and Athens. These two systems of beliefs and values blended together and really produced a new system in which politics and religion were separate and respectful of each other, even though they did to a degree overlap. The temporal power, the state, gave some privileges and protection to the Christian Church, and the Christian faith at times mollified and humanised the realm of politics, which otherwise would have been more brutal than it indeed was. This is a simplification, of course, but it is nonetheless broadly true. There were exceptions, most notably the medieval Inquisition of the Catholic and Papal Church. However, the Protestant Reformation of the 1500s improved the situation for both church and society by ensuring the further separation of these two realms, but not by breaking the connection totally. What the Reformation eventually gave was a Western civilization and society moderated by Christian beliefs and values, but not to the extent where the churches, Protestant or Roman Catholic, could dominate everyone, or where the churches could be corrupted by the temptations of temporal power and wealth. Furthermore, the naturalistic and scientific enlightenment of the 1700s and 1800s grew out of Christian beliefs in the perceptible and predictable laws of a creator God. This intellectual movement further clipped the wings of religious faith, and in some cases fanaticism. And it finally ensured a civilization which was, in some ways, very religious and evangelical, ending, for example, the slave trade, but which gave to us all a large chunk of secular space and freedom. We had John Stuart Mill, Charles Darwin, and today we have Richard Dawkins. Professor Richard Dawkins, an ardent secularist, deeply values our Christian heritage for these reasons, even though he does not share the beliefs from which they came. However, all of this is threatened by living Islam. How so? Well, Mohammedanism from the start was not just a religion, but was, firstly, a militant army for Allah and his Prophet, and secondly, a holistic community and civilization in its own right, which did not recognize the separation of church and state. Mecca is an armed and distorted version of Christian Jerusalem, and there is little, if any, place there for Athens at all. The idea of the separation of religion, politics and holy war, jihad, is just not there. Islam's object was always to win the world for Allah and his messenger, by invitation at first, or, failing that, by armed conflict. The invitation to embrace Islam, though couched in euphemistic words, was really an ultimatum, as we have recently seen in the case of ISIS. Infiltration or conquest at first, then gradual domination, and then, if that failed to produce wholesale conversion, the power of the sword. Edward Gibbon, in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, records that the religion of Mohammed was indeed spread by the sword. That is how it quickly gained dominance over a great swathe of the earth, from the Pyrenees to the Indus Valley. This was its golden age, as its devotees saw it, whether Sunni or Shiite, long since gone, and by many much bewailed. However, once in charge of a society, the Mohammedans wrote the laws and influenced the culture of those whom they either charmed or intimidated. And they did this both to discourage alternatives to Islam, which by the way means submission, and to induce compliance with its in many ways vicious and in other ways sensual creed. After about 800 years, and after the Mohammedan world had transmitted ancient Greek and Persian learning to the West, the lands that they had conquered in the 7th century had become majority Mohammedan societies, and had fallen into sensual degeneracy. But the middle world, as Tamin Ansari refers to it, of the followers of the long-dead Mohammed, was too committed to its prophet and both his Quran and traditions, or Sunnah, to adjust or to adapt. It had no reformation in the 1600s, which might have taken it back to the more peaceful Quranic surahs of the time when Mohammed had been less powerful and more peaceful in Mecca. And it got no scientific enlightenment in the 1700s or since. Islam, especially in its more ardent devotees, is very much time-locked into the early medieval period of honour killings, death fatwas, and religious warfare and supremacism. It is a kind of Ku Klux Klan of religious hate, as we saw over the Salman Rushdie affair, in which books were burned and the author of them threatened with death here in Britain. In the early 20th century and later, some majority Mohammedan states have tried to modernise by adopting some Western, that is Christian and humanist values, to some degree. But the voices of the radicals, who are the traditionalist devotees of the Prophet, are now struggling to take them back to the violent traditions of the Prophet and his later revelations, given to him when he had fled from Mecca to Medina and had become more powerful and less tolerant. The most spectacular example of this was the Iranian Revolution in 1979. But it is by no means confined to that earth tremor. We only have to take note of Wahhabi Saudi Arabia, Hamas's Gaza, or, in many of the places, the current genocides against Christians in Indonesia, Iraq and Sudan. Even today, Mohammedan Turkey still denies its genocide in 1915 against the Christian Armenians, in which 1.5 million Armenians were put to death, and which served as the inspiration for Adolf Hitler's Holocaust against the Jews. Iran has recently threatened to wipe Israel off of the map. Pakistan criminalises blaspheming, that is, criticising the Prophet, and attempting to leave the faith is likewise a criminal offence in this self-professed moderate Mohammedan country. In many parts of the world, a pure and an unreformed Mohammedanism is flexing its muscles and demonstrating both its violent tendencies and its deeply intolerant inclinations. In this country, we have had the fatwa and the resulting threats of murder against their fellow Mohammedan Salman Rushdie, simply for writing things of which they did not approve. This strikes at the very heart of a liberal and democratic society in which the Enlightenment thinker Voltaire defined genuine tolerance when he said, "I do not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." No, Rowan Williams is deeply wrong about that faith of militant submission that he praises. Williams has been likened, when he was in office as the Archbishop of Canterbury, to being the High Mufti of Canterbury. It is high time that someone like him opened his eyes. As Jesus said, if the blind shall lead the blind, they shall both fall into a ditch.
Thank you, Reverend West. In my personal opinion, Williams is a traitor to his tribe and his country and his religion. World News. Nigeria. Boko Haram terrorists slaughter 1,000 Christians by shooting them, cooking them alive and chopping them up in pieces. Shubat.com reported before that the Boko Haram Muslims in this same Christian village killed 100, but now a new report says 1,000. As one report described the slaughter, Mbitsa, who supports Ogtiku's grassroots Lift Up Now outreach to Nigeria, is a member of the Church of Christ in Nations on the lower coast of Gwoza and was away in Maiduguri during the attack. Boko Haram killed Mbitsa's pastor, Musa Ishaya, and at least 9 members of the Church are the Brethren in the attack, Mbitsa said. He has not heard from many since, as communication towers were destroyed. Only my elder brother, I heard from him among my family members, Mbitsa reported. Some brethren who escaped to mountains and bush for 10 days now, only God knows how they are surviving without food and water, etc. Most of the brethren we communicate and get this information from them, their batteries are down. As Boko Haram blocked exit roads from Gwoza and went door to door killing people, Ogtiku said Nigerian military officials abandoned their weapons and fled, leaving Boko Haram unchallenged. Now these weapons have fallen into the hands of the Boko Haram, Ogtiku said. A few people were able to escape to the mountains, just exactly like is happening in northern Iraq. A few people are holding out on the mountains, but most of the people in the village are being slaughtered. There's no communication between Gauza and other parts of the country. I was told many Nigerian soldiers refused to go and confront Boko Haram because their wives protested. They felt they were just sending their husbands to an untimely death. World at 8. Fear is an important part of the Islamic toolkit, and it works. Just look at Europe and the UK, frightened out of our wits in reality. Guide dogs and guns, America's blind gunmen. In the USA, being blind is no bar to owning and carrying firearms. The blind people who do it say they're simply exercising their constitutional right and present no danger to the public. When Karen McWilliams went to the sheriff's office in Fargo, North Dakota, to fill out the paperwork for a permit to carry a concealed weapon, the staff immediately noticed he was holding the harness to a guide dog. The woman behind the desk pointed out that he would have to pass a shooting test before being granted the licence, but McWilliams said he knew that. He told her not to worry. The day of the test came and McWilliams duly went along to the police firing range with a friend who was also trying for a permit. The targets were half-size cutouts of assailants, positioned 7 yards away. McWilliams fired a series of shots with a .357 Magnum, all of which landed in the heart region of his target. During training on the firing range, McWilliams learnt to take aim by listening to the sound of his target being wheeled back against the wall. It served him very well. McWilliams says he shot better than 2/3 of his class, and his final exam scored 105 out of 100, with one bullet somehow ricocheting and passing through the target twice. World at 8. That'll teach the nanny brigade. Save us from Iraq-Syria Caliphate, Eastern Christians. In a letter sent to all Arab embassies in Italy and the Vatican, the Rome representative of the Christian Melkite Church on Wednesday demanded that Muslim political, military and religious authorities and international bodies stop Islamic extremism and the brutal religious ethnic cleansing underway by the Islamic State (IS) in Syria and Iraq. Father Mtenaeus Haddad called the silence of national and international religious and secular institutions disturbing, as nothing had been done to stop the gestation, rise and cruel practices, medieval or even prehistoric, used within a legitimate caliphate allowed to be created in Syria and Iraq. It is an offence to the human race, to the Muslim religion and to its intelligence, the letter from Melkite Church reads. It is no longer tolerable that churches be desecrated, that people are executed for being Christians, and that they are crucified and their corpses are desecrated. We call on governments around the world, especially those in the Middle East, added Haddad, to stop the unacceptable and shameful extortion of money that goes by the name of jizya. What other limits, he said, have to be passed before international diplomacy takes action to restore respect for human beings and civil order, in this world where it is a crime to abandon an animal, but it does not seem to be one to establish a caliphate between two sovereign states or practice anarchistic religious ethnic cleansing. Melkites, Byzantine Rite Christians, are one of the most widespread churches in Syria and Iraq. They view themselves as the first Christian community, dating the Melkite church back to the time of the Apostles. World at 8. That is the one reason the West won't really help. They're too Christian, and we never ever stand up for our own birth faith. Well, not in the UK we don't. Thought for the day. Democracy versus dictatorships. Along with diversity, multiracial communities, multicultural countries, multisexual people and all that blather, the word democracy is continuously rearing its ugly and improbable head. Like communism, democracy is the refuge of the losers of this world. The I'm not putting my head over the parapet brigade, the peace lovers and the ones who want everyone else to do the hard work and dying so they can cash in on the heavy price that democracy inevitably brings. Democracy and the words and deeds it entails belong on paper, similar to true Marxism, because it cannot apply to human beings en masse, let alone entire vast countries, on which it is applied by mainly the West and its viewpoint of how everyone else should run their countries, and yet fails to run its own. Power to the people means pure anarchy and power to a few people means democracy. It simply doesn't finish the way it is ever implemented or started. One can look at Switzerland and say yes, that is a true democracy in action, But look at the facts. Switzerland has rarely been at war over the last 3 centuries. No civil wars, no immigration, no colonisation and virtually no national opinion on world matters at all. They've sat out every war in the modern age. They also sit on vast amounts of international money from whomever cares to place it in their banks. All their citizens are obliged to do national service and even ordinary citizens carry firearms. Their form of democracy has not shifted from the Middle Ages, rather like the Muslims, only in a negative as opposed to a positive way. Of course they are an icon to be looked up to, but if you think that what they run is a democracy in all but name, you would be right. It is a modified police state, with everyone having a vote, and the only rumblings to come out have been over certain immigrants they've been forced to take, and most of those are Muslim. Now the Americans are the forerunners of democracy. And as that word evolved, as they took on the New World with mainly European refugees fleeing from sovereign states or religious pogroms, you can see where they got it from, that very odd word, freedom. Now I like Americans, hell I married one, but their one big mistake was in a form of interference not seen since Hitler started marching around Europe, for the most part reclaiming various previously Prussian-ruled kinglets. I'm talking about the invasion of Iraq under Saddam Hussein. At the time I rattled my war sabre as well, but as we all know, true knowledge comes in hindsight along with the rewriting of history. Apparently in the first months of occupying Baghdad there was an order to dismantle the Iraqi army, which included all forms of uniform wearing officials and soldiers. Of course this was meant, one would hope, so that a new form of Iraqi soldier was formed. Well, it wasn't. It was done to crush Saddam's forces and make sure they did not rise and reclaim the land. It wasn't sectarian from the US's point of view. But it became sectarianism in its purest form, as certain members of certain sects of Islam were now pariahs, and we are now reaping the whirlwind of playing chess with a huge country and its people. In fact, the US and Europe acted worse in Iraq than pre-war Third Reich. At least the Third Reich imposed its iron will on its own country, at first not thousands of miles away in the Middle East, on a country which for years had existed on a dictatorship army rule, which although not democratic, worked well for the majority of its inhabitants. At least a European could walk down the street without having his legs blown off. We've done the same in Libya, Syria and Egypt, only now Egypt has been saved from the Western idea of Islamic democracy by the General al-Sisi, who now runs an army-ruled country. Libya is now the gateway to Europe for thousands of migrants swarming into it, and is in fact a country which is now so undemocratic that it makes even me want to cry. Assad in Syria has had to fight the West in all its glory just still to be in power, and bear in mind Syria was one of the only Islamic countries to still have Christians and Muslims living together as well as other minority religions. Not so now. They are being slaughtered in the name of Islamic democracy, which is just another name for Islamic jihad and sectarian murder and paybacks. The Middle East has never been democratic, even through the dawn of time. Neither has Arabia or Africa. They've either been ruled by a monarch, a general or a dictator, or in the past tribal chieftains. There's always been, until the last 2 centuries, a person at the head of the pecking order. And once a country, like anything, even a political party, loses its head, it loses its way. It is by no mischance that for the most part Africans and most Arabs still cling to their tribal or sectarian allegiances, and in doing so have survived. Democracy is not their byword, however many dollars we give them, however many of their people we have to put up with in our own countries simply because they're too indoctrinated to make their own countries livable in, so proceed to make ours unlivable in the process. It's no wonder that there are few Arabs or Negroes who have hit the headline for finance, medicine, science, music, the arts, or in any of the things that apparently go hand in hand with a democratic way of thinking, because it is foreign to them. That is where dictators win hands down, and army dictators or dictators who enlist the help of the armed forces are a force to be reckoned with and usually popular with the masses because they bring order. And although many suffer and many may hate the man at the top, it is better by far than a quasi-foreign idea being forced on people who have had enough odd ideas of their own and are by virtue of often being Muslim, sectarian in their outlook. We in the West have backed and paid for and trained a whole bunch of so-called democratic fighters, and they have all proved to be killers and rapists and had no thought of the destruction they've wrought in the name of democracy on their countries. Their aim has been to commit genocide on a grand scale and get publicity for doing so, as well as arms and money from the Saudis, the UN, NATO, the US and Europe. I'm not pro-Islam, but if you think about it, the last 30 years have been a terrible blot on the Middle East, and I can understand Muslim fury at this interference, if it was just that, but of course it isn't. Islam is sectarian to a great extent, and one sect cannot stand the other, and all hate the minority non-Muslims. So to bring a form of democracy into the picture is not only divisive, but laughable. All the wars have been staged, paid for and managed on a huge scale by global conglomerates, governments and bankers. Whole countries have had their rulers or governments replaced by what? Look closely and you'll see. Puppets, terrorists, pawns and yes-men. All supposedly singing from the same hymn sheet of democracy and peace, but all these countries, including the puppet state of South Africa, will fail and fail miserably, as indeed Uganda, Libya, Iraq and many more fall under the sword of democracy. Dictators are reviled, fascist dictators are reviled even more, and we all know the failures of the great Roman Empire. But these people did not fail in their jobs of making their countries great or livable. They failed when diversity and democracy married and set up home, as we Brits will be privy to one day. And finally, clean guy jokes. A man having a drink with his wife said he wanted to say something. I'm a lot older than you, as you know, and I will pass on long before you. You're not only much younger but still an attractive woman and will soon find someone new. I want you to promise me that when I'm gone you'll get all my golfing and fishing gear together, including clothing, and give it all to a charity shop. OK, she replied, I'll do that, but why are you saying this? Well, he said, I don't want some arsehole using and enjoying my stuff. What makes you think I'd marry another arsehole? She replied. Dear Mr Cameron, after 4 years of the smoking ban, 10,000 pubs have disappeared. Just imagine what could disappear if you banned halal meat. Give it some thought, please. A British engineer just started his own business in Afghanistan. He's making landmines that look like prayer mats. It's doing well. He says profits are going through the roof. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.